Welcome, everybody, to the Successfully Unemployed Show. My name is Dustin Heiner, and I'm here to help you learn how to quit that JOB, that just over broke job, by having any means possible. It could be starting a business, being a freelancer, being an investor, whatever it might be. And so today, I'm bringing on an expert who is fantastic at his business, which is editing and producing everything with podcasts. I have Alec Ogg with Parisar Studios on with me in the show. Alec, thank you so much for being on the show with me.
Thanks for having me, Dustin. I saw your shirt, The Successfully Unemployed, when I was at Podcast Movement, and I was like, I got to talk to that guy. And I didn't get a chance to, but here we are.
There we go. This is fantastic. Yeah, I love that conference. Just meeting all great podcasters. I love podcasting. It's just, I actually have three of my own. So, but we'll move on from there. Okay, so Alec, how do you provide for yourself and your family without working that 9 to 5 job?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I kind of do everything under the umbrella of podcasting, but my kind of specific superpower as an entrepreneur is kind of the Venn diagram of branding and positioning and then kind of entertainment production. So right there in the middle is that sweet spot of kind of connecting all the dots of is your music, title, artwork, tone, vibe, style all meshing together to create a one of a kind awesome podcast. Because one of the things I see go off the rails most often is people just have a terrible title or they've got terrible cover art and they end up handicapping their show right off the bat. So I really like the funnest part for me is helping business leaders and companies create great shows where all the elements are working together and it just really like connects with whatever audience they're trying to reach.
That's terrific because like I said, I have three podcasts myself, and I really, really enjoy podcasting. But at the same time, like you can definitely hurt your channel if you have a lot of these things that are bad. Okay, so I want to talk about you before you started doing this. Now, were you working a regular 9 to 5 job, and like how did you make that transition to be where you are today?
Yeah, so I was like the guy who studied theater and music in college and then moved to Los Angeles and was waiting tables and bartending, trying to make it in songwriting and acting and all of that. And I loved that, but I would kind of be at these doing catering gigs, and I'd see other, 40-year-old, 50-year-old actors and musicians working the same jobs with me. And I was, in my 20s and I was like, boy, I don't know if I want this bad enough to be in this same position when I'm 40 or 50. And so I was like, well, what do I do? And I started listening to entrepreneur podcasts and ended up moving back to Memphis to save some money. And I went to this life coach because I was completely lost, living with my parents, totally depressed. I just couldn't figure out how to crack that nut of like making money. So I'm just waiting tables, listening to podcasts, trying to figure it out. And at one of the small groups with my life coach, she said, all right, everybody raise your hand if you think Alex should do podcasting. And everyone in the room raised their hand. And I was like, oh my God, I had never connected those dots. And so pretty much the next day, I was just like, I'm going to figure out a way to make money through podcasting. And I think making a little decision like that can really go a long way and having the validation of kind of your peers and a mentor like that. But yeah, I just kind of sort of faked it till I made it and, would go to groups where there were entrepreneurs around and say, I do podcasting, even though I was kind of making it up. I was still figuring it out, but I got, one client and then two and then three. And each client, I'm learning so much. And then, it's like that compound effect where success begets success. And now it's my full time job. I completely support myself for the past 3 years running this Parisar Studios, where, like I said, we do recording and production and video and all of that for people's podcasts. But me as the executive producer, my favorite part is the branding and positioning.
That's fantastic. And as you're developing this business, I mean, I love the idea that you said you basically you faked it until you made it, which is it's fantastic. And so I invest in real estate. I buy rental property after rental property, and eventually I had so many that I was like, at 37 years old, I could quit my job. I don't need to keep working. But it took a shift in my brain, just like with you, where I had to fake it till I made it. And I started telling myself, even if I only had one property and I had a full time job, I said, no longer am I a full time job. I have a side job. This is my side job. Even though 100% of my money comes from my side job, I'm an investor. that's what I am, and that's what I'm going to share with the world. And as I did that, things started getting better and better. Same thing with you. You started telling people about your that you do podcasting, and then people want to hire you, and eventually you get better and better. I think it's fantastic. Now, if I were Alec, if I wanted to start in just like you did, I said, you know what, I have no clue, but I really like podcasting in general. I don't know if I want to be a podcast host. I don't know if I want to edit podcasts or do cover art or anything like that. Is there any like direction that we should think of as we're starting down this road of podcasting?
Yeah, I think the first question to ask, and this might be kind of a boring answer, but it's, do you have the space and time in your life to create a podcast? Because with you running three, Dustin, I'm sure you know that it is almost a lifestyle in some ways, and that it becomes at least sort of a part-time job. And that's not to scare people off, but it's to say that, there's a million ways to kind of generate leads or create content marketing if that's kind of your angle. And you can do blogs, you can do YouTube, you can do a lot of different things, but podcasting sort of does take a lot of time. And I think if you're in it just to kind of hire someone else to do everything for you and you're not really in it, people sense that because it's such an intimate medium, and you're not going to get the downloads you expect. And it's a real, yeah, it's an intimate medium. So just make sure before you get into podcasting that, yeah, this is the thing I really want to be focusing on right now. And I have space and time in my life to commit to it.
That's a good point. And I think anything that we're taking on, if it's worthwhile, also I would think also like you're gonna try to make as much time as you can. I literally gave up things because I wanted to be an investor or I wanted to start my podcast. I'm like, this is what I'm gonna do. So I pushed aside things that were potentially good, but I knew what route I was going and how it would benefit me. And so if somebody has that little bit of extra time and they're realizing they can fit it in, and they're saying, should somebody start on their own? We don't need to talk about like the technology behind it, like what type of microphone, what type of this, that. We don't need to talk about that because that's a whole nother everything. I'm just trying to get people into podcasting. So if somebody wants to be a podcast host or an editor, is it like just your personality needs to come out, or how does that play out?
We'll kind of do two lanes here. One lane is someone who wants to kind of jump in and be a host for the first time, and the other lane is going to be this kind of earning money through technical services. So if you're in the host lane and you want to start a show, I think the first thing you should do is kind of think about what actually lights you up and what fascinates you, and then think about like one singular person that you would like to share these things that excite you with, and kind of think about attributes of that person. Like, for instance, I have a podcast called Ideally, where it started out as just a personal development podcast. That's very broad. It's very kind of, you don't remember that, right? But then I kind of kept, homing in on it. And I realized that, well, I really like talking about personal development in the kind of entrepreneur world. And then I'm like, well, actually, it's creative people inside the entrepreneurial world. And then I'm like, oh, it's creative people who are also diagnosed with ADHD inside that world. So it's like, going kind of three or four levels in. And it's not that that's the whole market, that's just your target, and once you've defined things like that, it becomes so easy to make episodes and to book guests and to write out topics because you know exactly who you're talking to and you know exactly who you're not talking to. And before I'd narrowed it down, I was always worried I was going to offend somebody or be like, well, I shouldn't talk about entrepreneurship because that's going to make the people in full time jobs sad. Whereas if it's like, screw it, I'm talking to entrepreneurs, I don't care about how anybody feels about it, then it really makes you have a voice and have a lane. So that's a very difficult thing for people to do. People hate narrowing down their audience, but I'm telling you guys, it's an exercise. Just spend a few hours thinking about it, and it can really, jumpstart your podcast and give it a slight edge above everybody else's.
Let me quickly jump in there too, because I definitely want you to talk about the editing and producing, but I quickly want to add, like, literally say that was fantastic advice. So, if everybody listening, like, you really need to listen to that. So, I teach rental properties, and so as I was thinking about wanting to teach people about real estate, there's so many different types of real estate, from flipping to wholesaling to tax liens and all that sort of stuff. I said I don't want to do any of that stuff. I'm just going to talk about rental properties and everything about rental properties. It makes it so much easier on my brain because that's all I'm teaching and that's all I'm talking about at the same time. if people want wholesaling, they're going to listen to me and say, "Oh, this is not the right guy. Like this is the wrong podcast," which is fine because I don't want to teach that. I don't want to waste their time, and so they turn it off and go to somebody else, which is perfect. But when they want rental properties, like I'm literally the guy that they want to go to, and they start listening to, it, and then they stick around. So I definitely want to affirm you. That was fantastic advice. Okay, so if we are going to do the producing or editing in that direction, how would we think about going that direction?
Yeah, I would say it's sort of a totally different mindset in that a lot of the backside of production stuff can kind of be isolating, and so if it's really well fitted for detail oriented kind of introverted people. I've found I do it, I'm very extroverted, but I find that the post production stuff drains me, so I've hired people to help me out with that. But yeah, it requires just a lot of focus and detail. I'm editing in a lot of ways with podcasting, as you know, can just be cutting out a lot of ums and you knows and uhs and pauses and things like that. So, not necessarily the most creatively engaging work, but some people kind of get into that and they feel a sense of like peace and calm in that just simple task. So, you can get on Upwork and find a lot of work doing that. That's a great place to start. Or, just post on Facebook and say, hey, I'm offering these services, and people will reach out to you because a lot of people want editing. And you can just start off kind of cheap and work your way up, or however you want to price it. But yeah, editing is a, a very simple task in terms of the production. And then if you were going to be want to be kind of what I do and be a producer, which is definitely more on the creative side, I would say, just almost think about yourself as a coach. And in a lot of ways, it's almost like being a content coach, and you're trying to get these business leaders to realize that you can be confident in this space and you have a voice, and I'm going to help kind of just help nudge you in the right direction and show you like, you booked a priest on your entrepreneur show. Maybe that's not really fitting, because sometimes they just can't see it for what it is. So you're kind of just being a an eye for them, saying, "Hey, I think you're veering off course here." So does that make sense?
So, would you recommend, or is this a potential good idea? If somebody wants to be an editor or a producer or something, should they potentially just go ahead and start trying to find clients, or maybe start their own show so that they can get used to doing that rather than cutting their teeth on a client who is going to be paying them money? Or should they at the same time think about, maybe I could do it for free to get started? What are your thoughts about all that stuff to get started in the editing and producing?
Certainly the latter, the latter option of do your own podcast, because people don't really trust you, to be honest, if you don't have one yourself. And I paused my podcast for a long time because I got so overwhelmed with other people's shows, and I realized that it's so much easier to talk to a client if you can say, "Look, I'm telling you this YouTube strategy because I use it myself. Here's an example. I use this Instagram strategy because I do it myself." And so that kind of proof of concept and learning all these little things yourself as you go is invaluable. And it's definitely, if you're just trying to break in, certainly starting one and getting the reps, getting in that routine, and then being able to teach other people about it, certainly the best place to start.
I think that's great advice. And I started a podcast with my brother. So I knew I wanted to do a podcast on real estate, and he wanted to do a podcast on playing poker. He wants to teach how to play poker. And so back in, like, I don't know, 2016, we both liked watching The Walking Dead. And so we would talk on the phone and just go over the show, like talk about the movie or not the TV show. And then we were thinking, hey, why don't we just practice podcasting ourselves, like have a show where we're doing it? Anyways, that helps so much because I learned how to edit. I learned how my personality needs to come out in the show, as well as I'm just learning in general how a podcast should go. So if I'm going to be like taking on any clients, like you said, I can give their pointers. I can give them understanding of like, only people who've actually done it are going to really be able to say, yeah, this works or this doesn't work, especially with people that are brand new. Like it's a skill, but you can absolutely learn it. So, Alec, if we're going to say, now we're going to get our first client, we've already got our show. Let's say we have a, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 episodes under a belt. And we're thinking, you know what? I want to start a production company that's with editing and graphic design for the podcast cover art, all that sort of stuff. is it getting their first client? Is that like the hardest step, and then from there you can tackle on getting the other ones?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of internal mindset stuff you have to get through sometimes to get that first client. So in a lot of ways the first client is the hardest because you're kind of scared. It's like we said, you have that sense of faking it till you make it. No matter how much experience you have, sometimes it feels like you're faking it. To get the first client, I would say the best thing to do, I like to work with business leaders and things like that because usually they have a budget, they're able to connect their show to a greater marketing vision, and they usually know how to be consistent with content already, which are very big pillars of a good client I found. So I would go to just entrepreneurial meetups. This was pre-COVID, but we would have things like the Rising Tide Society. I'm based in Memphis, and so going to those meetings and just talking to people, mentioning you have a podcast. There's a lot of lawyers, coaches, real estate people that say, "Oh, well, like I've been trying to do a podcast, but we keep having all these technical problems. Would you want to come by and just work the microphones for us?" Sure. And so right off the bat, you can usually find somebody who is interested in podcasting. So just get out there. We hate to use the word networking, but just meeting people and letting them know because they're not going to know you're there and that you have these skills unless you tell them.
Networking is not a bad word. In fact, I love the word networking because my business grows so much when I meet more people and I share with them what I do and they share with me what they do and we help each other out. So, networking is absolutely fantastic. Now, Alec, tell me about starting with your pricing because you could easily just charge for free and say, "Hey, I'm going to do it for free." A lot of people might take you up on that, but some other people will be like, I personally want it for my shows. It's like, "No, for free, it needs to cost something." But anyways, tell me about pricing. How do we start pricing the strategy for starting out getting our first customer?
Yeah, it's a controversial thing about like working for free at first. And I'll admit that I did work for free for one client when I was in total, I need proof of concept here. And so I helped a guy launch his podcast just for free, and which I would have felt uncomfortable, honestly, charging him because I wasn't even confident in my own abilities at that point. But it was a great proof of concept. And then once I got his show rolling, I was like, okay, I really can do this. So that strategy is not right for everybody, but I think if you're really kind of just building it on the side and gonna like preparing to jump in, it's a great way to just kind of get your sea legs. So then I'm like, I don't know how to price at all. And usually when you're doing that, you end up underpricing, right? So
Always, always.
always. So I end up, kind of being the I do everything producer. I have a recording studio here, do video, do everything. And there's a lot of kind of we call them friend casts where it's kind of chum cast, people just talking sports or friends having a show. Those are great, and it's fun to produce them, but I realize that they usually don't have a budget that makes it worth the time and effort on my end. Because one thing you'll find with podcasting is there's a million moving parts, and it takes a lot of brain bandwidth. Each project you take on, you're taking a huge slice of your brain away for that project. I soon realized like it's draining to me to work with people that don't have a marketing budget. And so then I was able to kind of niche down on my market and say, okay, well, I like to work with business leaders who, like I said, are able to tie this to a greater marketing vision so they understand the value of it. And yeah, I started, charging for, here's recording fee, editing fee, uploading fee, these types of things. So there's kind of that a la carte thing. And then eventually I realized people don't really even know what services they want sometimes because podcasting can be so complicated. It's almost like another language to them. So it's honestly sometimes a better approach to just say, hey, one episode is going to be $270 for this tier. The next tier is going to be like $500 per episode. And then, you can even go higher than that with certain corporate clients that want really intensive editing. I've gotten over $1,000 on episodes for big overproduced corporate clients.
That's terrific. So, I completely agree with you. Most people, I did the same thing when I started charging. So I coach people how to invest in real estate. And when I first got started, I way undervalued how much it was, like how much it's worth. And now I really realized what my worth is. And so I obviously raise it up accordingly. But we all start low. Could you give me like an idea if I'm gonna start with just editing? I'm just gonna take somebody's podcast, they're gonna do for a month. which is once a week, what is like if I'm going to charge per episode or per month? Like what is like what's the very lowest? We should not go below this number. Is there something you give us like that?
Yeah, I think it gets a little technical in that it's like someone who does a 15-minute podcast who's like, I don't really care about the ums. That's a little bit different than someone who has a 2 hour podcast who's like really anal about all the ums and uhs and stuff because obviously there alone it usually is double the time, so suddenly that's a 4 hour editing job versus a 30-minute editing job. So you have to be careful with the kind of projects you're taking on if you're going to do the overall thing. But I would say that I typically would do, when I was starting out, like $50 for a quote unquote show. This also comes back to the fact that I'm an extrovert and editing is sort of draining to me. So I sort of looked at editing as almost like, this is a pain in my ass. So I'm going to kind of be like, charge a little bit more on this. But there are people out there who love editing and it's like, just second nature to them. So I'm really good at it, but it's not really in my desire zone. So I charge a little bit more for it. So now I charge about $100 for an hour edited episode, and then it goes up from there. But if you're just starting out, yeah, I would say that 25 to $50 range per episode, and then yeah, multiply that by 4 per month, then that's a good way to get your foot in the door. And then, you can kind of, if you're on that lower tier, you can scale to more clients, and if you're on the higher tier, then you can just focus on getting really quality clients that you like working with.
I like that. I like how you explained that not all clients are the same. Like my show, yeah, my show, it's literally just me talking, and I'm pretty decent. Like over the years, I've figured out how to remove the ums and stuttering and things like that. But at the same time, I kind of don't care if I do because it brings out my personality because I don't do it that often. But when I do, it's part of me. All that to say, if somebody's editing my show, they literally don't need to do that much work. And it's like a 20-minute show, 25-minute show at most. But if it's a 2 hour show, oh my goodness, that's going to be a lot of work. So I love that differentiation. And then thinking about like per hour, how much you're going to charge per hour for your work. Okay, so let's say we have a good amount of work coming in. We got client after client after client. Tell me about how we scale the business because we only have so much time in the day and the week to actually do all the editing. How do we now scale it to where we're actually like, I really don't like doing thumbnails. How do we get somebody else to do that? How do we scale the business now?
Exactly. I had a lot of fears about delegating because, they say entrepreneurs are like addicted to control. In podcasting, you sort of like, it's like this client's project is my baby. I do everything for it and it's successful because of me. And so I'm scared to pass off the editing. And like, it's definitely a mental thing that I had to get through. And I'm like, can I be a boss? I'm so used to being the solopreneur now that I'm almost scared to be someone's quote unquote boss. I added a bunch of mental baggage on there that probably didn't need to be there. And so, yeah, what I did, I read this book called Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt, and he basically had a 4 quadrant matrix, and he kind of had you write out all the tasks you do and then put them in this matrix. And basically, if you were good at it and you liked it, that was your desire zone. If you liked it but you weren't really fast at it, that was in your distraction zone. If you didn't like it and you were bad at it, it was in your drudgery zone. And yeah, there's 4 zones. And anyway, I realized that working with people, like I said, on the branding, the coaching, launching their shows to be these one of a kind perfect things for their personality, that was like what really lit me up in my desire zone. And I realized that the editing, although I'm really good at it, was not what lit me up, and it actually drained me. And so I went on to Upwork and I said, I'm looking for an editor for with this and this. And I one thing that really helped with hiring is listing your company values. Like we have, these values of like we enjoy good time, like here I am blanking on my company values. This is great. Here, let's do positive influence. So we like to all our shows to have a positive influence on people. We like them to feel comfortable and have like hospitality in what we do, and all these things. Of course, I'm blanking on my core values here, but I put all of those in the Upwork thing, and I got a lot of people that were like, "The only reason I'm responding to this is because of your core values." And I was like, "Oh, this is awesome." So then I got people that really matched my personality, and they got what I was doing. So now I kind of hired out those tasks that weren't really serving my highest leverage tasks.
That's a great idea. And so, how would the explain to me, how do we then tack on, because we don't want to just take in money from a customer, a client, and then just pay it right to the editor. Do we add on like 10%? Do we add on like 15%? Like, how do we then make sure that the company's making money as well?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm still in that learning curve right now, and I think that I like to make sure that if I was being hired by myself, I would respect me, and so I have this mentality of, like, at least $20 an hour for the kind of work we do, and I think that's not outrageous, but there are people out there that are looking for someone in India to edit their podcast for $3 an hour or something. And that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I just want people on my team to make sure that, you know, they feel valued and that I'm like, hey, I value the work you're doing enough to pay you 20 an hour. So I make my prices based off of that and just leave, 30 to 40% profit on top of that.
I love it. I love that idea. Now, cool. Okay, so man, Alec, you've given lots of advice. Is there anything we might have missed out of everything? Like either getting started, like definitely not get started, because everybody can. Okay, the one thing is just to get started. We all know that. From there, is there anything we might have missed to make sure that we have a solid business?
I hope this isn't oversaid on your show, but the money mindset thing, I think coming from the I'm waiting tables, I've never done the entrepreneur thing before. The idea of studying like having studied theater, the idea of studying business was so foreign to me. But then as I got into like listening to business podcasts and entrepreneur podcasts, I realized that forming a business is as creative as a lot of these things that I enjoyed, like writing and composing albums and things like that. And so once I realized that entrepreneurship scratches that creative itch, it was sort of like off to the races. And I was able to learn a lot more after I let go of like what I thought business was. So if anyone's out there is on that cusp of like, they don't really feel like they fit in the entrepreneur box, don't worry about it because you can learn and learn and learn. And then you'll wake up one day and realize you know more than all your friends about entrepreneurship. So you're doing the right thing by listening to this podcast because that's what taught me pretty much everything.
Great advice. Okay, let's jump into the rapid fire round. Now, the rapid fire round, where the questions are short, but your answers don't have to be. So, the first question is, if you were to go back and give your younger self any advice, it could be business or life or anything at all, what would that be?
I would say it would be it's okay to focus and it's okay to do one thing. I started out wanting to be a screenwriter, a songwriter, an actor, a comedian, all of these things. And I would put energy into each little one. And I was looking around, being like, why are all my friends succeeding and getting houses and everything? And I can't seem to get, a leg up. And I realized I was just building sideways because I hadn't committed to one thing. And I love variety, and so I felt resistance to committing to one thing. Once you do commit to one thing, it doesn't mean you don't have variety anymore. You can work variety into your one thing. So podcasting, like I said, I can design the art, I can work on the music, I can do all these things inside the column of podcasting that gives me that variety. And so I would have told myself if I could go back, hey, it's okay to do one thing and just try it out and commit to something, for like over a year, and people will start to know you for that one thing, and then that makes everything else easier.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I know, so I have plenty of streams of income. I love passive income. So I have plenty of streams, but I have a river of income. Like it's literally a flowing, gushing river, but I have also other streams. But that river is because I focused on it. Now, I didn't do that from the very beginning. I wish I would go back and tell myself that's a great point. Just be able to focus. And so once I realized that I needed to focus, that's when this little tiny stream of real estate got bigger and bigger and bigger. Now it's just like a gushing river. So I think that's great advice. Okay, what is one book that you would recommend? Could be, well, nonfiction book, but could be anything in business or life. Is there a book that you would recommend for us?
Yeah, the book that it's not even like that great of a book, to be honest, but you know how sometimes it's just like a mindset shift that happens when you're reading a book? It's called The Slight Edge by I think Jeff Olson. Have you read that one?
No, I haven't.
Okay, but it's basically this idea that if you do a little thing every day, like how does that play out 365 days later? So if you're checking Instagram for 10 minutes a day, what does it look like when at the end of the year you've looked at Instagram for 3,650 minutes? You know, has that changed your life? Well, what if you were meditating on a Headspace app for 10 minutes and you have 3,650 minutes of Headspace meditation under your belt? That might have actually changed something. And so it's this idea of, and then if you play that out over 10 years, so it's also about what are you telling yourself? If you're telling yourself every day like, "Oh, I don't think I can do this. I don't fit in with the entrepreneur world. I'm not good at making money." And you play those little thoughts out over time, it just sucks you down. So it's just it's sort of the compound interest idea, but to get a slight edge, just think of these tiny, tiny little things you can do each day. And over time, through repetition, it's really going to change your life. So that was a book that really shaped me, I think.
That's very profound. I mean, when you think about all the time, like in 10 minutes in one day, it doesn't seem that bad, but compounded over the entire year, over 10 years, absolutely. As opposed to like a flip side, if you try to get just 1% better every single day, that's 360% better than you were, the same year before. So I love that idea. Okay. So what is one tool? It could be an app on your phone, it could be a piece of paper and pencil, a whiteboard. What is one tool that you use regularly that we should look into using for our lives?
I would recommend Headliner to make audiograms for your podcast. So, for those who don't know what an audiogram is, it's basically kind of what you would see on Instagram to promote a podcast episode, where you might have the transcript rolling out at the bottom and you've got kind of a sound wave moving on the screen in front of maybe a still image of a headshot of the guest or something like that. And I had, been making these personally for clients and using different software, but it's headliner.app is the website, and they make it just super easy. And yeah, I charge clients a lot of money to make them, and I'm making them on Headliner. So that's kind of a little industry secret there for promoting your podcast, because people can't help but click to listen when they see that waveform moving. So that's my app recommendation.
I'm definitely gonna. I was using a different one, and then I was just realizing it's taking a lot of time. So I just need to hire somebody to do that because it needs to be done because that's so helpful in the business. Man, that's a great insight. So Headliner, I'll definitely look into that. Now, Alec, you've given us so much great advice and insights. I know people want to find you. How can they find you and reach out to you?
Yeah, so my podcast is called Ideally, and that's everywhere you can find podcasts. So if you're a creative entrepreneur, maybe you got ADHD like me, then check that out. I think you'll enjoy it. We basically just try to learn more about self improvement and entrepreneurship so that we can grow into our fullest potential. And if you want to find me personally, my name's Alec Ogg, so AlecOgg, and you can find me on all social just at that.
Alec, thank you so much. You've been a fantastic guest, showing us so many great insights into this business. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Dustin, it was such a pleasure, and I'm glad I finally got to meet you.